New tariffs are in effect under President Donald Trump.
Certainly a lot of uncertainty following what that impact will be. Joining us now is Bankrate Chief Financial Analyst Greg McBride to talk about this. Greg, good to see you. We'll start you off with this first question here. How will these new tariffs impact businesses and consumers in Texas, particularly for industries that rely heavily on imports?
Yeah, I mean, it's just going to lead to higher costs. And I think from the business standpoint, the other factor you have to look at is, might there be supply chain issues? For example, if they're looking for different suppliers that might not be subject to as high a tariffs, or looking at domestic suppliers that with the imposition of tariffs, now all of a sudden they're much more price competitive, does that create delays in the supply chain? So there's still more unknown than known at this point, but I think those are certainly things to keep an eye on.
Certainly keep an eye on those. How might the tariffs affect banking and lending in Texas, especially for small businesses and manufacturers?
Yeah, I think there's two things to keep an eye on here. Broadly speaking, if we were to see an economic downturn, or a worst case would be a recession, that's going to tighten credit across the board. But even short of that, at a business level, business-specific level, if this is an instance where a particular company's bottom line is being impacted, that's going to impact their access to credit. But for other companies that they're domestic only, they're not impacted by tariffs in any way, I think it's more business as usual.
And Greg, I know it's going to vary person to person, company to company, but generally speaking, what advice would you give on how to navigate these potential financial challenges?
I mean, for consumers, it's certainly a time of uncertainty, particularly if your employer is subject to tariffs or is very heavily involved in either importing or exporting. So develop a game plan. It's always a good idea to do what you can to beef up that emergency savings, pay down high cost debt, and then just look at what expenses you might be able to cut back on or eliminate if push comes to shove and we do have an income disruption of some sort. Maybe a 2-paycheck household goes to a 1-paycheck household. You want to have a game plan, and so having that game plan in place, I think, helps you sleep better at night in the meantime.
Yeah, that game plan can be so critical. Listen, before we let you go, we've seen the impact all the tariff uncertainty has brought to U.S. markets. Numbers have tanked this week. So what are your thoughts on that, and what needs to happen before we see a rebound?
There's been a ton of uncertainty, and so that uncertainty really clouds the picture, especially in the stock market where so many stocks were really priced for utopia. Valuations were really, really high. Well, any type of uncertainty that clouds that vision of utopia, and you're going to see prices pull back. And that's why you saw tech stocks, for example, really get hammered, even those that weren't necessarily impacted by the tariff situation. It's just the broader uncertainty with regard to the economy. So we need some clarity. And then the other thing is, just over time, we'll get more data, and that too will provide clarity as to where we are economically and whether or not this is just a short-term correction and a good buying opportunity, or do we see broader economic fallout?
Everybody's watching those numbers like a hawk, opening and closing every day. Greg McBride, Chief Financial Analyst with Bankrate, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. We appreciate it.
Thank you.